Before the college entrance exam, my cousin, who had repeated the exam for 3 years, saw a post online from a rich woman in the same city. She was looking for a short-term husband. The age had to be between 18 and 25. A high school education was fine. If they had a child at the first try, they would get 5 million yuan. It was best if they were local people. When my cousin saw it, his eyes lit up. He felt that he was the most suitable candidate. I advised my cousin not to believe the post. It felt like a scam. He should concentrate on preparing for the college entrance exam. I persuaded him several times. He finally gave up that idea. Unexpectedly, my cousin only scored 340 points in the college entrance exam. When he was feeling down, he saw his roommate post about his new luxury car in his circle of friends. I asked and found out. My roommate had become a temporary husband to a rich woman. He got $1 million bonus all of a sudden. He had successfully crossed social classes. My cousin was so jealous, while complaining that I had cut off his path to wealth, and stabbed me to death. I woke up again. I returned to the day my cousin had swiped the rich woman's post asking for a child. If he wants to take risks this time, let him go ahead. Liam, take a look at this. What do you think? My cousin Ethan rushed into my room with his phone in his hand. His familiar voice rang in my ears. It made my head ache. I looked up. I happened to meet his deep eyes. I couldn't help but take a step back. At that moment, his expectant gaze overlapped with the fierce gaze he had when he killed me before. I froze in place. I'm dead, aren't I, Liam? Can't you hear me? I'm talking to you, aren't I? Ethan shook me. It was then that I truly realized that I had been reborn. Familiar images, familiar posts. The post read, seeking short-term husband, age 18 to 25. High school education, 5 million reward for a successful pregnancy. Local residents preferred. Previous life. Ethan saw this post before the college entrance exam. He repeated the exam for 3 years. His grades got worse and worse. He knew he wouldn't pass. He had no confidence. He just wanted to find a shortcut. But the internet was full of these fraudulent posts. Either they were scams, or people had been cheated out of a lot of money. I told Ethan, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and there's no such thing as a pie in the sky. I also told my aunt, Ethan's mother, with my aunt stepping in. Ethan reluctantly gave up on the idea. After the college entrance exam, Ethan failed again. He only scored 340 points. Meanwhile, Ethan's roommate applied for a job because of that post. As a result, not only did he marry a rich woman, he also drives a luxury car and lives in a mansion. He often bragged to Ethan about it, because Ethan was the one who shared the post with his roommate in the first place. Ethan was very jealous. After returning to my house, he stabbed me directly with a knife. His eyes were red. He kept cursing me. If it weren't for you, I would have worked less hard for decades. What a scam. What a scam. I think you're just jealous of me. I want you dead. I fell in a pool of blood. I kept begging for mercy, but Ethan didn't seem to hear me. He stabbed me dozens of times. Ethan was acting as if nothing had happened. My cousin begged my mother not to sue Ethan. She knelt down. Crying, she said to my mother, "Our family has already lost a son. You can't let our family become extinct, you know. My family's unreliable. I can't count on him. I can only rely on Ethan." My mother has always valued family relationships. In the end, I had to help Ethan make false testimony, saying that I killed myself. Ethan escaped legal punishment, but I became the ghost of a wrong death. God probably couldn't stand it anymore. This gave me a chance to start over. As for that cousin, if anyone wants to help him in the future, go ahead. I won't get involved again. Wow, such a good opportunity. Cousin, I really think you should give it a try. I managed to force a smile. Ethan looked a little stunned. He probably didn't expect me to agree so readily and to support his decision. Usually, Ethan is the older brother, but I have always done well in school, and I act like a little adult because of this. My aunt wanted Ethan to repeat the year successfully, so she asked him to move in with us. Really? What if it's a scam? What if I fall for a scam? Ethan asked with a worried face. My brows furrowed. In fact, Ethan knew it in his heart. Last time when I tried to persuade him, he said I was overthinking it. He said I was worrying for nothing. He didn't mean that he didn't understand. He just wanted me to say it for him. If this was a fake, it would be fine. But if it was real, he could blame it on me. Ethan and I grew up together. He was born selfish. Like my mother, I value family very much. That's why I never held it against him. Now I understand. Ethan is a white-eyed wolf who can't be tamed. I watched Ethan smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Cousin, you're too sensitive. How could it be a hoax nowadays? Many people have weak sperm. I think that man has a problem. But cousin, you're different. You're young and strong. You definitely won't be like that. Ethan listened to me. He was still hesitant. I squeezed his hand, encouraging him to say, Cousin, the college entrance exam is coming up soon. Your grades are getting worse every year. Can you guarantee that you will get into a good school? We have to plan for ourselves. If you really have millions, you can work less for many years. For many people, millions may not be earned in a lifetime. As soon as I heard me say millions, Ethan's eyes immediately lit up. He seemed to have made up his mind, and immediately stood up and said, I understand. Cousin, I have to live for myself too. Who says that there is only one way to live, by studying? After saying that, Ethan hurriedly left. Obviously, he was convinced. My eyes became cold. If there is really such a good thing in the world, then what is the point of others studying hard? I continued to bury my head in my work. At this time, there was a loud noise outside. Where did my son go? He's not home at the weekend. Where has he gone again? No need to guess. He has no regard for other people's feelings. And he never thinks he's too loud. Who could it be but my aunt? Hi, sis. You're here. Then I heard my mother speak in a low voice. I'm asking you. Where's Ethan? My aunt's footsteps got closer and closer. The sound of her high heels stopped at the door to my room. My mother hurried over to stop her. Sister, Liam is studying. Don't go bothering him. My aunt didn't seem to understand what I was saying. She pushed open the door. She shouted at me. Liam, it's not your aunt who's talking about you. You have good grades. It doesn't matter if you study or not. You need to take a good look at your brother. He's repeated the year for 3 years and still hasn't passed. It must be that you're not trying hard enough. If he can't pass, it's your fault. I have heard my aunt accuse me of this more than once. At that time, I really did put in a lot of effort with Ethan. Not only did I have to complete my own study tasks every day, I also spent a lot of time tutoring him. Ethan just didn't seem to understand anything. He had already repeated the year for 3 years, but he still couldn't grasp those knowledge points. But Ethan just couldn't learn. My aunt blamed me for not teaching him seriously. She put pressure on me and my mother every day. My mother told me about this helplessly. Liam, why don't you stop reading, spend more time with your cousin? I felt a little resentful towards my mother, but I also understood. She had had a hard life. My grandparents had died young. My aunt had raised my mother and uncle single-handedly. Everyone said that an older sister is like a mother. Later, everyone became successful. My mother married well, but my aunt, she married an incompetent husband. Life was not easy, and she happened to give birth to Ethan, who was just as useless as his uncle. He was a poor student from an early age, but I was very studious. My aunt always asked me to teach Ethan. I didn't even have any free time. In my previous life, I was killed by Ethan. My aunt not only didn't feel guilty, but was instead thinking of ways to get Ethan off the hook. I died for nothing. I sneered. Auntie, I really did try my best. It was my cousin who didn't try hard enough. I also have to prepare for my exams. I also want to get good grades. I can't let my cousin's failure affect my results too. As far as I can remember, this was the first time I had directly confronted my aunt. I am an introvert, just like my mother. I am usually a pushover. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been afraid to rebel against my aunt and Ethan. In my previous life, I could have gone to the best university, but they dragged me down. In this life, I will no longer feel guilty. Our family no longer owes my aunt anything. When my aunt heard me say this, her already big eyes widened even more. Her eyes were about to fall out. She frowns all the time. Her worry lines are especially deep. Now they look even more intimidating. I have long since seen through my aunt. She is just a bully at home. She picks fights with anyone who is nice to her. Is that how you speak to your elders? If I hadn't helped raise your mother, you wouldn't even exist. My aunt always says this. She knows it in her heart. Whenever she says this, I will definitely listen to her, because I have always been filial. I always put my mother's feelings first. But this time, I will not compromise anymore. I gave a cold smile. My mother gives you most of the family's income every month. And this has been going on for more than a year or two. My mother has been doing this since she started working. What you spent on my mother back then has long been repaid to you in full. As for your gratitude for my mother's upbringing, my cousin has been living in our home for so many years. It's not just my mother. I've also done my best for my cousin. Today, when you say this, do you feel that we haven't done enough, or are you still not satisfied? My mother and aunt were both stunned. They probably never imagined that the usually well-behaved and gentle me would say such sharp things. My auntie came back to her senses. She turned to look at my mother. With a strange tone in her voice, she said, "I think Liam has these thoughts now. You must be the one who taught him this. If you don't want to support me anymore, you can just tell me. Why tell your child these things? I can't bear to lose face." As soon as my mother heard this, she immediately became nervous. "Sister, I really didn't mean it. How did Liam know? I'm not sure. You should be given money. Why would you think that about me?" My mother was about to cry. I know my mother very well. She would rather suffer herself than make my aunt uncomfortable. My mother told me that my aunt dropped out of school when she was young. She worked alone to send my uncle and my mother to school. My aunt has suffered a lot. My mother can't help but shed tears when she thinks about it. She often tells me, "Your aunt has done so much for us. When you become successful in the future, you must take good care of her." At first I didn't understand. Later I realized. When my aunt was making sacrifices, she would always tell my uncle and my mother over and over again how hard she had it, how hard it was to earn money. Only my mother naively believed her. My aunt sneered. She said, "If you didn't look down on me, Liam is still young. How would he know about this?" When my mother didn't know what to do, I immediately chimed in. "Don't blame my mother, I'm a child. But I'm not stupid. Why do I get no pocket money every week while my cousin does? Why do you wear gold and silver while my mother wears rags? Have you ever thought about these things? My mother always told me to be filial to you, but you always felt that our family owed you. You never let us off the hook. My uncle stopped seeing you after he got married, because he saw right through you. He didn't want to have anything to do with you anymore. After my uncle got married, he gave my aunt a sum of money. It was to repay her for raising him when he was young. No matter how much my aunt nagged, my uncle ignored her. My aunt pointed at me and said, "Your uncle is a snob. He married into a wealthy family and has since ignored his sisters and me. They say that a nephew takes after his uncle. I can see that you will be just like him in the future." I laughed. My uncle dislikes the poor and loves the rich. Why does he continue to associate with my family? Are my family's conditions better than yours? My mother saw that my aunt was so angry that her face turned red. She quickly held me back. She didn't want me to say anything more. I really didn't want to argue with my aunt. In her opinion, everyone owed her. Even if I spoke my mind today, she would not feel that she was in the wrong. Instead, she would think that I was being unreasonable. I sighed. My aunt slammed the door and left in a huff. My mother came over to me worriedly and asked, "What's wrong with you? You weren't like this before. You were always sensible and polite. How could you say such things to your aunt?" Looking at my mother's expression now, I felt particularly bad. In my previous life, I died. I don't know if I should blame my mother. She could have kept Ethan in check, but she treats Ethan like an aunt. I always feel like I owe him something. My mom has always indulged Ethan, put up with him. This has emboldened Ethan. He knows, as long as Auntie is around, even if he kills me, our family won't pursue it. But my mom, every time she's the one who suffers. She's too kind, so kind that she has no bottom line. That makes her weak. This time I was very firm. "Mom, we have already paid back the money we owe my aunt's family. I just want to concentrate on my studies now, preparing for the exams. I don't want to be my cousin's free tutor anymore. So many years have passed. Has he improved at all?" My mother was silent for a while. I thought my persuasion would make her understand something, just as I felt I was doing the right thing. My mother suddenly slapped me. She said, "I have worked hard to raise you. Is this how you repay me by arguing with your elders?" I looked at my mother in shock. My breathing almost stopped. It felt as if all the blood in my body had coagulated. I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. It felt as if my throat had been cut off. "If I tell you I've already died once, my cousin killed me, you believe me? I know that sounds ridiculous. Maybe my mother will think I'm crazy and send me to a psychiatric hospital, but I can't think of any other explanation. I can't think of any other excuse." My mother froze for a moment. Her hand, raised in the air, froze in midair. In the end, she left my room without saying anything. I don't know if she believed me or not. I sat back down and continued with my homework. But the tears fell like unstoppable beads. They kept falling. Even the test paper got wet. In the evening, Ethan hadn't returned yet. After my mother had finished cooking, we both silently bowed our heads and ate in silence. No one said a word. Dad is away on business. The table is so quiet you can hear the sound of the chopsticks. After a long time, Mom finally speaks. Her tone is very careful. "Did I hurt you? I'm sorry. I couldn't help it, you know. Your aunt has been kind to me. I can't be ungrateful. I can understand my mom, because when my uncle wanted to be independent, he also patiently advised her. He said that when my aunt was young, she did sacrifice a lot for her younger siblings, but she never liked going to school, and the money she earned from working was not much. In fact, they had always been living on my parents' pensions. My uncle gave my aunt money. It was just because she had taken care of them, but my mother did not agree with my uncle. She thought that my uncle had misunderstood my aunt. My uncle could do nothing about it. He had to agree with whatever my mother thought. Maybe my mother understood it from the beginning. She just didn't want to face it. She had lost her parents when she was young. Only her aunt had been there for her for a short time. She had become her pillar of support. So no matter what my aunt did, my mother would never fall out with her. Besides, I was a junior. It was wrong to argue with an elder. My mother also thought it was because she hadn't brought me up properly. Now my mother would apologize to me. She rarely hit me, because I had always been obedient. As I said, my mother is kind, but a bit stupid. I didn't say anything, because I knew, as soon as I opened my mouth, she would start lecturing me about how hard my aunt worked. I was so tired of hearing it, I found an excuse to leave the table. As I turned around, I saw that my mother seemed to want to say something, but I made up my mind to go. If my father and I kept on indulging my mother like this, she would never realize her own problems. I just went back to my room and sat down. My auntie hurriedly knocked on the door. The noise was so loud that it sounded like something terrible had happened. The neighbors all poked their heads out. They looked unhappy. My auntie ignored them. She shouted, "Liam, come out here. You're a disaster. How could you let your brother do that? Do you want to ruin your brother's life, you ungrateful brat? Get out here." My mother hurriedly went to open the door. I slowly came out of my room. My auntie looked very disheveled. She was holding her phone up to my mom's face. She yelled angrily, "You've really raised a bad son. You actually encouraged my son to apply for that high-paying job. Now my son is trapped in a hotel. He's been beaten all over his face, and they want a ransom of 500,000 yuan. Otherwise, they'll call the police." My mom panicked when she heard this. She had never encountered anything like this before. Plus, my auntie had a loud voice. My mother was at a loss for what to do. She kept asking me what to do. "Where is your cousin? Do you know? How come he suddenly disappeared and got kidnapped?" My aunt's eyes looked like they wanted to kill me. I calmly said, "My cousin took the shortcut himself. What does it have to do with me?" My aunt was even more angry. She stared at me fiercely. Her eyes were red with anger. "Even if he wanted to go, couldn't you have persuaded him? He is your brother." I shrugged indifferently. "My cousin is already so big. Can't he understand that there is no such thing as a free lunch? I'm so busy myself. I don't have time to persuade him. You have the time to assign blame. Why don't you hurry and save someone?" My aunt gave me a fierce glare. Her eyes were full of anger. She immediately grabbed my mother's wrist. I saw my mother's fair wrist instantly turned red from the grasp. She said sternly, Give me 500,000 yuan. It's all your son's fault. If your son hadn't stopped me, my son wouldn't have gone to that kind of place and been set up. My mother was scared. She said tremblingly, Sister, I've already given you all my money. Where would there be any savings left in the family? My aunt said unceremoniously. Then sell your house. I don't care. Ethan had an accident in your house. Your family is responsible. I sneered inwardly. Ethan and my aunt were practically cut from the same mold. They took all the good things. And when something bad happened, it was our family's turn to take the blame. In my previous life, our family was always the one taking the brunt of it. Luckily, my father was a man of honor. Otherwise, someone like my aunt would have been kicked out long ago. My mother panicked. She said timidly, but if we sell the house, where will we live? This is our only house. Auntie even said with a straight face, can't you just go out and rent a place? If anything happens to my son, I won't let you off the hook. I immediately walked over to her and pulled my mother's hand away from her. I stared at her coldly. Auntie, can't you be reasonable? My cousin can't even control his own legs. How can we outsiders control him? You know you have to sell the house to save your son. Why don't you sell your house? Are we born to be inferior? Do we have to serve your family? Auntie was so angry that her shoulders shook. She pointed at me and ranted for a long time, but she didn't say anything meaningful. Maybe my mother finally saw through Auntie's selfish true colors. She also mustered the courage to say, Sister, I have helped you raise your son for free all these years. I have been supporting your living expenses. Now there is a problem. How can you blame it all on me? I don't have any money, and I can't sell the house. If you really care about Ethan, then you'd better find a solution yourself. My aunt was stunned. She probably didn't expect her younger sister, who she had manipulated for so many years, to turn against her over 500,000 yuan. Actually, I understand. This incident is just a trigger. In the past, no matter how unreasonable my aunt was, at most, she would just make my mother work harder. As for money, if she gave it to me, she gave it to me. But now, my aunt has her own house and money, but she's got her eye on my family's house. Not only does she not care about my mother's life or death, she doesn't care about mine or my father's either. My mother is a good person. She's also very nice to my aunt. But my father gave her a home. I'm her own flesh and blood. She knows who's more important. What are you saying? Have you forgotten? I gave up my studies to support you and your brother. How can you say such a thing? Mom's expression froze instantly. I think she may have recalled the scenes when my uncle patiently persuaded her. After a while, the original calm on my mom's face disappeared. A cold smile appeared. She said, Sister, my brother is right. You really are a person who knows how to repay kindness. Liam also said, I want to repay it. I have already repaid it long ago. You are in a hurry to save Ethan now. I can go with you, but the money, I don't have a single penny. My aunt shouted angrily. You ungrateful brats. You are all ungrateful people. My uncle also came. When he entered the door, he casually stepped on my family's carpet with his shoes. He lay directly on the sofa. His feet were still resting on the coffee table. He looked completely carefree. I only have one son, and my family doesn't have any money. If you want to kill Ethan, then don't move. I don't care. But if Ethan dies, your son will not survive either. I suddenly remembered my previous life. My aunt and uncle had once said something like this. Our family was not large. We had already lost one child. We can't lose our child again. But now, my uncle actually wants me to be buried with him. What a double standard. I sneered. You just try to move me. My cousin and I have never been related anyway. If you keep stalling, my cousin will really lose his life. As soon as my uncle heard this, he sat up straight immediately. I knew it. My aunt and uncle both think that our family is easy to deal with. They think we are pushovers. They just have to be difficult. My mother's feelings for Ethan will make her do anything to save him. But seeing that I am being so firm, my mother didn't say anything either. They should have understood. My uncle gave me a fierce glare. You just wait. My uncle walked over to my aunt. The two of them conferred in a low voice. He asked, how much is left in the family savings account? They spoke in a low voice, but my mother and I heard them. My mother held her breath as she waited for my aunt to reply. It seemed that my mother had already thought of a solution. If my aunt really didn't have any money, she would borrow the money to help her out. After listening to my aunt's reply, my mother's face instantly turned pale. She looked completely deflated. My aunt said, "There are still 700,000 to 800,000 yuan left, but that's for my son's wedding." I saw my mother's eyes suddenly dim. Her body was also swaying. It seemed like she would fall at any time. I quickly walked over to hold her. My uncle, however, said, "What's the point of thinking about the future now? You're about to die. What's the point of getting married? Go get the money quickly." Before they left, they didn't forget to glare at my mom fiercely. My aunt even directly said something ruthless. "You won't know someone's true heart until it's too late. A sister like you, I'd rather not have. Don't come looking for me again in the future." After my aunt and uncle left, my mom suddenly sat on the ground. She covered her face and cried. "Liam, did Mom do something wrong?" I sighed. I felt a little helpless. I said to my mother, "There is nothing wrong with being kind, and there is nothing wrong with repaying kindness, but you have to do what you can, and you have to see if the other person is worth it." My mother suddenly looked up. Her eyes were full of tears as she looked at me. "Liam, I've made you suffer, it's true. Ever since Ethan moved in with us, I've felt aggrieved every day. Our house is not big. It only has 3 rooms. One of them is especially small. It used to be used to store miscellaneous items. At that time, my mother planned to buy me a bunk bed so that I could live with Ethan, but Ethan was not happy about it. He insisted on saying that he wanted privacy. Not only did he not want to live with me, he also called my aunt, saying that my mother was abusing him. My mother had no choice. She could only sort out the utility room and let me live there. In her opinion, we are the hosts, Ethan is the guest. We can't treat him badly. Before Ethan came, I had pocket money every week, but after he came, my mother had to pay for his tuition and all kinds of other expenses. She also had to send money to my aunt every month. There was very little money left. Since then, I've never had pocket money again. Every time Ethan deliberately showed off the snacks in front of me, I could only swallow. I asked him in a low voice if I could have a bite, but he deliberately threw the snacks on the ground and stomped on it. He said, "Eat it, slave. People like you are only fit to be my slaves." I didn't tell my mom before. I was afraid she'd be sad. Maybe. My mom already knew. She just pretended she didn't. I've hit a wall so many times, but I still want to be nice to Ethan. Thinking back now, I'm actually quite similar to my mom. I didn't answer my mom because I can't forgive her for the injustice she once did to me. And I can't forgive her, but she is still my mother. So I didn't say it's okay, and I didn't say I hate her the next day. My aunt led a bruised and battered Ethan to my house. As soon as he entered, Ethan kicked open my door angrily. "Liam, why didn't you stop me? I clearly said it might be a scam, but you still let me go. Now your family owes my family 500,000 yuan, and I've been injured. Your family has to pay me another 500,000 yuan. I put down my pen. I turned to look at Ethan. My auntie was standing in the doorway. Her arms were folded across her chest. It looked like she was going to support Ethan all the way. I smiled. "Your legs are your own. They're not mine. If I tell you to go, you go. Then I tell you to go eat shit. Why don't you go? How old are you? Don't you have your own thoughts? If you don't want to go, can I force you to go? 1,000,000. Where did you get the courage to mention this number?" My mother was a little anxious. She quickly walked over from outside and stood in front of me. When she came back to her senses, she found that I had already silenced Ethan. My mother looked at me in surprise. Because both she and I are soft-hearted people, we will not resist unless we have no other choice. But I have already experienced too much. Now, except for me and the people I love, I will not let anyone bully us again. My aunt saw her son being wronged. She immediately put her arms akimbo and pointed at my mother and me and said, "My son is right. This is all Liam's fault. You have to pay compensation." I took out my phone. "I remember what you said yesterday, Auntie. From now on, our 2 families will have no more contact. You are a stranger to my mother. You are making such a scene in someone else's home. That's breaking and entering. I can call the police and have you arrested." My aunt panicked. Ethan immediately smashed my phone. He glared at me fiercely. "Liam, you want to live? I'll tell you what. if you don't pay compensation. We'll take the house, Ethan said. Then he turned to my mother. Auntie, considering your difficulties, I'll let the 1 million go. You can keep the house for my wedding. You and your husband and Liam can move out. Oh yes, remember to transfer the ownership to me. I've seen unreasonable people, but I've never seen anyone as unreasonable as Ethan's family. My mother was so angry that she couldn't speak. Her lips were trembling. I had expected what they did. Otherwise, when my eldest aunt died, they didn't even shed a tear at the funeral. My uncle happened to come in. When he saw the scene, his face immediately changed. In fact, I already told my uncle about Ethan yesterday. My uncle was out of town. He hurried back especially for this. He said, "Big sister, can you stop making things difficult for your younger sister? She's been good to you over the years. Hasn't she?" Auntie actually quite fears uncle. When he said he wanted to cut off all contact, she didn't say a word. She only dared to complain in front of my mother. Now, Auntie's arrogance has obviously weakened. She just smiled awkwardly. "I was just joking with my younger sister. It's mainly because Liam is so outrageous. He just watched his brother get cheated and did nothing. I'm here to teach him a lesson." My uncle and I listened. We both snickered. "You've got it all wrong. Even if Liam goes to persuade him, your arrogant son won't listen. He won't share the benefits with Liam, but he'll make Liam responsible for any losses." Auntie turned off the stove. She was worried about not finding an excuse to leave. My uncle continued, "Who is the older brother anyway? I'll tell you. If you ever come to my sister's house again and cause trouble, I'll come back every time. I don't care what the neighbors think. My sister is a good-natured person. I'm not someone to be trifled with. You know very well what you did to us all those years ago. You have no worries about food and clothing, thanks to your parents' pensions. You only leave us a little money for school fees. We had to work while going to school. You have done nothing for us. Only your youngest sister is stupid. She believes your lies. If you don't leave, I will say something even worse." Auntie's face turned pale. She knew that uncle would definitely do what he said. She had no choice but to drag Ethan away helplessly. My mother's expression was not good either. No wonder. Since I was a child, Auntie has always said how hard it was for her to raise my mother and uncle. My mother knew nothing about the truth. My uncle didn't want to ruin my aunt's image in my mother's heart. He kept his mouth shut and never told the truth. On the surface, he was protecting my mother, but in fact, he was indirectly harming her. My uncle looked at my mother with a face full of apologies. Before he could say anything to comfort her, my mother gave a relaxed smile. "That's good. Fortunately, it is." I sighed. I gave up the room to my uncle and mother. On the day of the college entrance exam, I walked along the road. I was extremely nervous. This nervousness was not because I was afraid of failing the exam. It was because I was so excited in my previous life. Because of Ethan, I not only failed the college entrance exam, but also passed away before I received the admission notice. That was the biggest regret of my life. Recently, I have been studying hard to improve myself. Now I am full of confidence. I believe I can get good grades and realize my dream of entering Tsinghua University. I just got off the bus and ran into Ethan's former roommate. He was driving around in a fancy car, showing it off. I saw that there was still some time before the exam, so I deliberately hung around next to him. He soon noticed me, pulled me aside, and said in a mysterious voice, "Hey, I have a great way to make money. If you go along, you can drive a fancy car like this too." This guy didn't know that Ethan was my cousin. I took out my phone from my pocket and started recording. I asked him, "What's the idea?" "I know a few rich women. Their husbands have some problems. If you're willing to donate sperm, they'll pay you millions. Think about it. You can make millions just by being one person. Find a few more people. You don't even have to take an exam. You can surpass many people in many lifetimes." I finally understood, in my previous life, that man wasn't relying on rich women. Instead, he was helping those so-called rich women find a match. They used the immortal trick to deceive those who want to get something for nothing. I laughed. "Wait a minute. I'll go tell my mom I'm not taking the exam." The man saw that I believed him. He nodded immediately, leaning against a tree. He smoked a cigarette. I turned around. I quietly called the police. It wasn't long before the man was arrested. I handed the recording to the police. The whole process went very smoothly. Ethan stood in the distance, with red eyes staring at me. Seeing his eyes made my whole body tremble. Those eyes were so familiar. That's how they looked when he killed me in my previous life. I couldn't help but take a few steps back. I thought he would lose control, but he just slowly walked towards me. His eyes gradually became sad. "Why didn't you stop me this time?" "Ah, Ethan is back." I calmly glanced at him. "Now you know the truth. And you've also tasted the bitter fruit. You brought this on yourself. No matter what you choose, you're just a useless piece of shit." Seeing that Ethan was about to lose control, I continued. "You still owe me a life. In the future, stay away from me. We'll go our separate ways. If you still want to hit on me, or hit on my family, I don't mind going down with you." Ethan stopped in his tracks. I understand. This time he didn't dare to take another step. "Let me give you some advice. Study hard. Concentrate on your studies. Nothing in the world can be achieved without hard work." After saying that, the bell rang. I walked into the exam room. After a while, the college entrance exam results were announced. Ethan didn't take the exam. He might have to take a makeup exam. I successfully got into Tsinghua University. My mother was especially happy. She hurriedly told my father the news. My father immediately rushed back from abroad. He was preparing to throw a celebration dinner for me at our house. It's already pretty amazing to have a few undergraduates like me who got into Tsinghua straight away. I've really brought honor to the family. On the day of the celebration banquet, I saw my aunt leading Ethan over. My mother didn't want to talk to them at all. In the past, whenever my aunt was around, my mother was always especially warm towards her. Now it was like this. I guess my aunt had really broken my mother's heart. My aunt said to my mother with some embarrassment, "Third sister, it was my sister who did wrong in the past. This is a little something from me. Congratulations to Liam on getting into a good university." My aunt slipped the red envelope into my mom's hands. My mom didn't take it. She withdrew her hand and said coldly, "No, I can't accept it. If I take your money today, I don't know how many times I have to pay it back in the future. From the moment you tried to sell my house, we're even. Don't come here anymore." My uncle walks in with my aunt and my cousin. My mother immediately welcomes them warmly. My aunt and Ethan stand there. They look a little uncomfortable. My aunt looks at me apologetically. She wants to hand me the money. I take it. I say calmly, "You owe our family far more than this." But my mother will not pursue it, and I will not say anything more. "Turn left when you leave the house. Take care. Goodbye." I watch my aunt and Ethan's lonely backs. I am a little lost in thought. If we treat each other with sincerity, my aunt might not have disowned her own siblings. She never understood the character of honest people. Once they have been touched on their bottom line, it can never be recovered.